Okay, the book of Revelation, chapter 13. And we'll cover a few things today that will try to make application for us even as we sit here in 2023. This week is entitled Team Dragon. Now, this isn't to be confused with the South Lake High School mascot. It's a different kind of dragon. And I presume that you covered that adequately last week. The South Lake dragons, I believe, are green. And this dragon is red. So, not to be confused. Next week is the triumphant lamb. Steve gets all the easy ones. What's the deal? That's a fun one. Enjoyable, really a lot of fun, a lot of joy can be taken out of the 14th chapter. So sometimes when you're reading Revelation, it can be very frustrating. And so I just recommend that you go to these passages like chapter 14 in particular, which give a lot of hope and promise and give us joy when we read them. But today, talking about chapter 13, and the book itself, again, don't lose heart, remain faithful. God is sovereign. This will get better. All authority is given to Christ, the Son. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, Jesus says in Luke chapter 10. And he's sitting at the right hand of the Father, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, according to Ephesians chapter 1. And this is powerful to us today, and it's powerful for them back then. And I really hope that we think of it in these terms, to remain faithful, don't lose heart, no matter what's happening in the world around us, in culture, the culture wars, in physical wars that are going on in the world, in strife with your neighbor, with family members, with brethren, whatever the situation may be, there are troubles. Jesus said, in this life you'll have many troubles. And it's so true. It's every kind of trouble, every classification and category. And so how do we persevere? Well, Hebrews chapter 10 gives it to us this way. In chapter 10 and verse 25, don't forsake yourselves together as the manner of some is, but what? Come together more often, regularly, be constant. So much more so as you see the day approaching. He's talking not about the next day, next Sunday. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. That's what he's talking about. But it has applicability to us today. You say, well, I'm not worried about Jerusalem being destroyed, so I don't have to come to the assembly. No. So much more so as we see maybe what day would be a day of awe and judgment for us. Oh, the day of our demise individually, right? The day of our leaving the planet. I told my 20-something-year-old new employee that I had working with me, I said, make sure you back up and keep all this, and here are the passwords and whatnot. And he goes, are you going somewhere? I said, I'm one Danish away. He smiled. Yeah, we don't know when we're going to leave the planet. He'll come as a thief in the night, but he'll come maybe for each of us at a different time. Or indeed, we might be on the planet when he does return, and the whole world will see him, and the trump will sound, and that will be a glorious day. I don't know when our day will be, but we to remain faithful. And so much more as we see our day, the day, coming closer and closer. Okay, let's look at some of these things in the news today. I just want us to get us in the right attitude as we think about these poor people in Judea and throughout the Roman Empire in the first century, as they were dealing with persecution, We're dealing with persecution today in various parts of the land. In April, lest you think I plucked this out of the last 20 years or something, I confined my tabulation here to events that are happening in April of 2023. 63 souls showed up at DFW, having transited from Thailand, and they took refuge here in Texas. Why were they taking refuge? They're referred to euphemistically by the State Department as the Pilgrim Church. They're leaving as pilgrims, if you will, because they believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and the Chinese Communist Party does not like that. And so there's persecution on them. And they took refuge in our own airport over here, flew in, arrangements were made, and they took asylum. Nicaragua and Cuba this last month, news accounts picking up the imprisonment of unregistered churches. The Islamic northern neighbor to South Sudan, that is the country of Sudan, is having border skirmishes and are killing people not because of the border, but because of their faith. They're taking opportunity to kill people and persecute them because they claim to be Christians. They profess that Jesus is the Christ. In Canada, the Canadian government over the last 15 years has been working hard to ban sermons in various provinces, like in Quebec. They have taken more of a decry against people preaching that it is a sin to not live according to God's law. In Kivu province, North Kivu, in the Democratic, not so much, Republic, not really, of Congo, DRC is in this last week and a half, there have been an ISIS group there that killed, I'm not making the number up, over 80 people professing simply because they professed to be Christians. They professed that Jesus is the Christ. They were killed for that. Now, that's today. That's the world we live in. And so when we read these things, it is important for us to see that they would have read these things looking for relief from the Roman Empire, looking for relief from the Jewish leadership who were persecuting those thought to be of a sect, which they were not. They were of the way. So just put it in that context. And let's go to Daniel chapter 7 before we begin our reading in Revelation. And I think you'll find that the language that's used here in Daniel is very helpful in understanding the 13th chapter of Revelation, because the exact same language is used. So, Daniel 7, beginning in verse 2, Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds in heaven were stirring up the great sea. I don't know, did you guys get into what the sea and the land and all that meant last week? He was ducking it for this week. All right, I'm going to tell you one man's thought of this man, and I'm not the only one, believe the sea represents the Gentile world, the Goy, the nations, the Roman Empire, you could call it. And the earth would represent the land of Israel. It would represent that area that is thought of as Judea and surrounding that whole promised land. So when he says here, stirring up the great sea, the 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, the nations. and different from one another. And it's probably been a while since you read Daniel, so I give you the cheat sheet just to remember. The first beast was the lion, and that represents Babylon. Second beast is the bear, and that represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And then the third is the leopard, which represents the Greek Empire. And then finally, the fourth is the Roman Empire, and that beast is just described in parts. His teeth, iron, and his feet, and all that sort of thing. And so out of this, Daniel chapter 2, as you may recall, says, in the days of these kings, and what kings? In that fourth empire, in the Roman Empire, in the days of these kings, Christ's kingdom would be established. The church, that would last forever. In the days of these kings, chapter 2, verse 44, in the days of these kings, a kingdom would be established that would go forever. Never again would there be any separation of that kingdom. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of Christ, the bride of Christ, the church. Okay, so we have it. So as we read further, let's advance. In chapter 7, verse 4, the fourth beast, again, Roman Empire, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong, iron teeth, and it devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And it was different from all the other beasts, for all the beasts that were before it, and had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up from among them another horn, and a little horn, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking great things. And at this point, you may be reading and thinking, I give up, I'm moving on. I don't know what he's talking about. Well, just allow me then to give you at least one man's opinion. He's talking about Rome. He's talking about the Caesars. He's talking about people we can identify. Maybe I'm wrong, and we'll still have ability to eat together at the potluck following worship today. Hope you come. All right, let's turn the page then. Verse 13, and I saw in the night visions, behold, the clouds came. The clouds of heaven there came like one of a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all the peoples and nations and languages should serve him. And his dominion is everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. And his kingdom, one shall not be destroyed. It's a kingdom that can't be destroyed. What did Jesus say of his kingdom? My kingdom is not of this earth. It's my armies they're not physical. I would fight if that were the case. That's not the case. When they took him, he was telling them it's a spiritual kingdom. We're fighting evil. His kingdom. All right, well, this is prophesied in Daniel chapter 7 and so many others. But as you read this and you sympathize with the Jews of that day, that first century church, and then preceding the church, the disciples even, who were struggling to understand, why is this not a physical kingdom, right? Over and over again. Well, if you read things like this and you were being poked in the face all the time by the armies of Rome, by occupied army, would you not, first inclination, be physical? Of course, just natural. I mean, wouldn't be that it would be spiritual, but indeed, they missed it, and it was spiritual. Now let's get into the text. Revelation chapter 13. See if you don't see some of the same kind of language. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Sound familiar? And there were 10 horns, exactly what it was said, and 7 heads, and 10 diadems on their horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Remember that one? And its feet was like a bear's. Remember that one? And its mouth like a lion's. And these are just images to say powerful, vicious, ferocious, right? And to it the dragon gave his power. So the dragon is who from last week? The devil. Satan is the dragon. So the dragon gave his power and his throne and his authority to these beasts that come out of the sea. He gave his authority to these Caesars, these Roman rulers. And one of its head, verse 3, seemed to have a mortal wound, and its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast, and they worshiped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" Notice the dragon was not hurt. It was the beast that was hurt. All right, so I'll just throw this out for whatever it's worth. I'm not the Lone Ranger on understanding it this way, but if you view it a different way, that's fine. If indeed this is an early date and they were struggling with the Romans occupying the land and coming in and then finally destroying every single vestige of the old covenant, destroying in 70 the temple, destroying the lineage that would give them the authority to have a priesthood, destroying the feast, not having a place to go back to, a complete dispersion. There would be no one left in the city after 70. It was gone, eradicated, off the map, cleared, not one stone left unturned. If God wanted to bring about a way for first century Jewish Christians to move away from any kind of clinging on, as Hebrews writes, don't go back. We got a better covenant. We got better promises. We have a better advocate. We have better. Don't hang on to that. Why? Because in a few years, just in a couple years, probably, it's not going to be around anymore. So Julius is the first in the lineage. The 10 horns could be thought of as these 10 Caesars taking us through that destruction date. And Nero is serving at the time, and these 3 that were plucked up only lasted a few months each. In fact, many don't even recognize them. Many Romans of the day didn't recognize them as emperor, but indeed they were granted that by the Senate. And so after Nero, who is in the writing, if you believe an early date, then Nero is the one responsible here, and these 3 are plucked up. A mortal wound, that is a coup d'etat occurred. And who directed the ending of their lives prematurely? Vespasian. He directed from Nero's authority. Nero passes, he kills himself, and then he is directed in February of 67, he directs Vespasian to put down the wars and the unrest in Judea. These 3 guys take over in that meantime, and he directs people back in Rome to take them out. This looks like a divided, like a civil war. And so when you read the text that says, and the world was amazed, it was a mortal wound, it looked like they weren't going to survive it. Well, it could be interpreted, and I certainly do, that these 3 in rapid succession die, get killed, coup d'etat, and Vespasian is behind it. Finally, he is named, because I think the Senate got tired of this change, and said, okay, you're behind this? Okay, we'll make you Caesar. We'll make you. And he was appointed by Nero originally, and so it does seem to fit in. There are 10 horns. Might be you might feel is too contrived, but it seems reasonable to me. All right. Well, the number we can all agree on this. The number 10 symbolizes wholeness, and the symbolic language that's used. Horns are a symbol all throughout prophecy in the Old Testament and the New related to power. We could go back to Daniel 7 and see that revisited. And then further, the 7 heads. I'm not so big on this, but there are several of the heads of the physical topology of the top of Mount Zion, where the Temple Mount is in Jerusalem, those 7 heads of Jerusalem. 7 is a completeness, and it can be political power or it could be a geographic height. I just throw that out. You can study it later. All right, back to chapter 13. So we were covering that which came, the beast that came out of the sea. Now let's go and look and see the beast that comes out of the earth. Look at verse 11 and follow. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth, and it had two horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon, and it exercises all the authority of the first beast, all the authority of the Caesars in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. So Rome healed up its problem with successions and killings and coups d'etats, and the world was surprised. But Vespasian comes out of it with a lot of strength, and so nobody is denying that. Well, who are these two horns like a lamb's horn? So these are not as powerful. And whatever they are, they give credit and they give subservience to the beast that we were talking about. Let's say that's the Roman Caesar. I think it is. If and I'm wrong, that's okay. You'll love me anyway. Let's look at this though in the context of how the Jews of Judea would have thought about Rome at the time. Maybe these two guys that I'm naming aren't the two guys, but they just amazingly are the ones that are appointed by Rome to serve as curators, procurators. That is like a governor. And they serve in the same exact time frame that we're talking about. Probably in the writing of this book between 62 and 64, and then his successor until 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem. These two guys, if they would have had a newspaper in the Jerusalem Times, they would have made the paper every day. They were causing havoc and destruction. Look at what is said of in Josephus about Florus. So he was appointed to replace Albinus in 64, and he was appointed by Nero. And he was serving under direction of Nero. His predecessor was serving under the direction of Nero. So he is the guy that Josephus single-handedly says caused the reason for the wars. So if you read about the wars, it's not in the scriptures, but you see Jesus talking about these things in Matthew and in Luke and in Mark, where he says there will be wars and rumors of wars. They're always going on, this tumult that's going on in Judea. And so these things are happening. Let's read about one of these things. So upon taking office in Caesarea, that's near modern-day Tel Aviv, on the coast, that was the fortification that the Romans had. They could get access from the sea, and that's the reason why they put it there. All right, so Florus, he began favoring the Greek population in the city over the Jewish population. Imagine that. Did the early church have the same problem? Yeah. So you go to Acts chapter 6, and you can read the Jewish Christians and the Hellenist Christians. They were, the widows weren't being taken care of the same way, and so there were, people that struggled. There was one chap that was appointed in what we think of as kind of like a deacon's job, and he was indeed a Greek himself, a proselyte. Read all that from Acts chapter 6. All right, so you have them, he's treating them differently. In the local population, noticed the policies and took advantage of the local Greek population, the Hellenists. They took advantage of the circumstances, as every society does. When government shows favoritism, it's amazing what happens. So the Jews were worshiping at their local synagogue, and a Hellenist, a Greek pagan, sacrificed several birds at the entrance of the Jewish synagogue. This was going on back in their day. And of course, if they would have when they did that, it caused their building to be unclean. People couldn't go through the entrance to go to the synagogue. This is just, the Hebrews of the day, the Jews. And so in response to this action, the Jews sent a group of men to petition Florus for redress, for legal action, to get paid a tort fee, to be compensated, to hey, let's not have this happen again, all those things. Take legal action. Maybe I'll get a writ. Maybe I'll get some relief. And they even paid him 10 talents of silver to hear the case. Lest you think this is a court filing fee, it's not. It's a bribe. It's too much for a court filing fee. And so they pay him, and it's recorded by Josephus, this situation where there are 10 talents of silver. And Florus refused to listen to their complaints. Instead, he had those petitioners imprisoned. So now we have Jews in the area being imprisoned. In fact, it goes worse than that. So later, he had 17 talents of silver removed from the temple treasury. Temple's still standing at the time. And he claimed the money out of the treasury for the emperor, for whatever reason. And the result was, of course, as you would expect, that Jerusalem fell into unrest and began to openly mock. Now, I don't recommend this. Peter says, honor the king, right? What did they do? They mocked the ruler appointed by the king, Caesar, and so they mocked this guy, the procurator. They mocked him by passing a basket around to collect money as if Florus was poor. You probably don't want to taunt the guy that has the Roman army at his beck and call, but that's what they did. So he overreacted. And he reacted to the unrest by sending in soldiers in Jerusalem the very next day when they did this. And he arrested the city leaders, a number of them. And he had many of them whipped and some crucified. Even though many of them were actually Roman citizens. That was illegal, but that was the kind of passion he had. Now these are the two horns that were involved in the problems of Judea, out of the earth, in this area during this time frame. So after the first Jewish-Roman war, Florus was replaced by Julianus, and he served all the way until 70. And it's all, just a matter of history. So there was a lot of persecution, religious persecution, and freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion was not present in that time. It's protected under our Constitution in this country right now, but certainly people have been taking shots at it. So the persecution here, if you believe an early date, as probably was discussed or not discussed in chapter 12, I'll just give you 2 cents worth. If you believe in an early date for the book of Revelation, then we would note the fact that Nero indeed served and told and commissioned Vespasian in February of 67, which is 1,260 days, 42 months. Those are popular numbers in Revelation chapter 12, and also in Daniel, and again throughout the book of Revelation, talking about this Vespasian being directed to persecute or to put down the unrest in Judea. And so that's exactly 42 months from the time in which Vespasian was given the direction from Nero, and then they suffered their persecution. Well, many fled the persecution. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says, when you see these things happening, when you see the eagle coming from the east, when they circle, when they come, when Titus shows up, you need to leave. And they left. The ones that didn't, 1.1 million died in Jerusalem. All right, let's just so you don't think I'm making this up. Jesus said, Luke chapter 21, as recorded there, verse 20 and following, And when you see Jerusalem surrounded by the armies and know that its desolation has come near, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are the days of vengeance. Whose vengeance? God's. Israel had been idolatrous. They had rejected the Messiah. They had crucified him. It was a time, in God's time, in the fullness of time, he sent forth a son to be born of a woman under the law. He did it victoriously. He gave them time to convert, to change, but they would not. Verse 22, to fulfill all that is written, alas, we know that part, so let's skip down. For there would be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people, against the Jews. Jesus speaking to them in that time, before these things were to happen. They will fall by the edge of the sword. They will be led captive among the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times the Gentiles are fulfilled. When were they fulfilled? Well, it's by one account anyway, by 70 AD, they trampled and leveled the city. In verse 32, this is not a futuristic thing like it involves today's news. This is history. Why? Because this generation will not pass away until all this has taken place. All of it. A-L-L. Okay. Vespasian. He was commissioned by Nero, as I said before, in February of 67. That's 42 months before the fall. You can go to Josephus and pick that up at any time. Now, this is really very dubious, I think. But it is interesting. And so to teach chapter 13 and not mention it, I think would be wrong. So let's go into the text again and begin reading this situation. So let's pick up in verse 13. And he performs great signs, this beast. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come from heaven and on the earth in the sight of men. You know, symbolic language. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, and telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So after all these things happened, he's still exerting, Rome still exerts power. And even after all the turmoil with their coups and whatnot. Verse 15, chapter 13, and he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and to cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. People were going to either bow to Rome, bow to Caesar, give allegiance to Caesar, give loyalty to Caesar, give their obedience to him, or they would lose their life or suffer persecution. So that is what is meant here. He was given authority to continue for 42 months, we talked about. And then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. So God granted this wish. When you read Job, it seems like, why would God allow Satan to have his way with Job? To glorify God. And God takes care of Job, doesn't he? Devil comes before the throne of God and says, oh, he didn't serve you for no reason. You've put a hedge around him. He's very wealthy. All these things are going well for him. If you take these things away from him, he will not serve you. And God says, have you considered my servant Job? You know, he's not serving me for that reason. Okay, you put him to the test, Satan. He gives him his way. But don't touch his body, right? That was layer one. Then the next he comes back and he gives him even more authority, and he loses everything and remains faithful. These people remind me of this situation. They remain faithful. Those who are going to remain faithful. And it has the purpose of doing what in Jerusalem at the time? The gospel spreads. The end of all vestige of the old law comes about. He takes away the old that he might establish the new, according to Hebrews. All right, so the new covenant comes into place, and we have a new relationship with God. And we ourselves are a holy priesthood and a royal priesthood and a holy nation. And we are the ones that now go into right to the Father through the Son. We have a better covenant then. We have better promises. He's given us the written word. We have a better high priest. He suffered just like we did, tempted in all points as we, and yet without sin. And you just go on and on. You see the power behind it? God really used the destruction of Jerusalem to end all vestiges of every reliance and all the pulling and holding on to the old law. Must have been a terrible struggle. All the epistles that we read, they're struggling. The Judaizing saints are trying to force circumcision and all kinds of these things and eat certain foods and whatnot to the Christians that are from the Hellenist Christians, the Greek Christians, those that were not from the Jewish background, those that were not Jews. So we see this over and over again. So as we read on, I think you can see that there was a purpose behind this, and it advanced the cause of Christ as a result. Anyway, they were in a situation where their faith is put to the test, that they would not worship the image, the beast. They would be killed, according to verse 15. Killed for their faith. He causes all, but small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on the right hand or on their foreheads. How many times have you heard somebody some harebrained modern day example interpretation of what the mark of the beast is? Oh, we're getting away from currency, and now we're going to, debit cards or something, and so that's the mark of the beast. Well, it might not be a good thing, but at the same time, it's not what he's talking about here. The mark of the beast would have been some image that they would have bowed to. Caesar had, in Rome, and those who were given power by Rome, were given an eagle, as the warriors would hold up their guidon with a little pennant and flag, and at the top would be a brass, or usually brass, eagle. And then in their coinage, they had certain imagery that is used. And all of it would look like, when Jesus pulls the coin out of the fish's mouth, he says, "What image do you see?" Well, it's Augustus. It's Caesar. He had an image. They had images. You either bowed to and gave obedience and loyalty, expressed it, or you'd lose your life. And so you couldn't even transact business. So let's read it. It didn't matter who you were, you would receive this mark on your right hand or on your foreheads, and that no one could buy or sell except you had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. That is his name itself. What is it? Here is wisdom, verse 18. Let him who has an understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Well, if you do take and you Hebrewize, if you will, the name from the Latin to the Hebrew, you would get these letters pronounced. The N there is pronounced nun, the R, resh, etc., etc. And there are numbers that are given to these in the Roman numbering system. They didn't have numerals in their system. They had letters that represented values. So the numerals here, or the letters here that are used, can be given a value, and these spell Nero Caesar, the office. Whether you agree with this or not, that's fine. It meant something to them. You ever think about the fact that in the first century they were given miraculous gifts, spiritual miraculous gifts that we don't have today, and it met the purpose of their time. According to the 4th chapter of Ephesians, we see there, until we all come to unity of the faith. That is the full, complete giving of the written word. And so when that which is in part is given, that which is be done away, right? When it's complete is given. Well, the book is here, and as a result, we don't have spiritual gifts today, but in the first century they did. Was there anybody able at a congregation likely to have the ability in the first century, certainly in the early part, to be able to say, this is what he means. We would take all this out. What do we take from it today, though? What would be the mark of the beast today? We have to make an application of it, not the literal. The application would be, let's not bow to the things that demonstrate that we're wanting to be friends with the world. Let's not be participants in darkness. What would be things that would indicate that we're basically bowing to worldliness? How can I list the ways, right? I get tickets to go see so-and-so. Oh, brother. I get a movie ticket to go see something I shouldn't have seen. I go in the store and I sample something I shouldn't have sampled. Little by little, in some cases not so little, we move from spiritual purity to unholiness, friendship with the world, bowing to the beast. Whoever the beast is of the day. Whoever represents the agents and the team members for Team Dragon, the devil. Let's not be deceived. Don't go with this materialistic gospel that's preached in so many places, starting south of us, and 200 miles south. And so we have a situation where God is going to take care of you. He wants you to be rich. That materialistic doctrine, that materialistic gospel is not the gospel that is given by Jesus the Christ. His gospel is this: come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest from what? From sin, from destruction, from anxiety and not being reconciled to the Father. These people knew where they were going. They were told, God is supreme. He's sovereign. Don't bow to the beast. Be faithful to the end, and you'll be given a crown of life. Please do read chapter 14 for next week. It is beautiful. You have the Lamb, sovereign and victorious. Any first comments or questions? Greg, you just look like you have something you want to say. Very good. Imperfection. 7-7, they can't hear you on 777 would be, or 888 even, but 777, you don't have to be a Boeing pilot to appreciate that plane. It's perfection. 777 is the perfect number, complete perfect number each time. But 666 would indicate imperfect, really imperfect. Okay, any other? Okay, good comment. Any other? Yes, I hear you. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, there are various Hebrew writers who also point out the reason 666 was chosen. We know 6 represented men to the Hebrew.
Yeah.
And the 6s, according to many writers, represented the 3 controlling powers that men had in the world. Power of government.
Power of government.
Power of finance, money, business.
Power of money.
And power over religious beliefs.
Power of religion.
And so it should just show that in this world, man has power in those areas, but that's where their limitation lies. Just here and now in this world. And then when Jesus comes, as Jesus said, you'll see him coming in the cloud, then the 666 is totally destroyed and replaced by the 777.
One thing I want us to remember throughout the study of Revelation, what's the one prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet? His second coming. You must have the key. Yeah, you've got the test key. Yes, his second coming is the only outstanding prophecy fulfillment. And we know how it ends. Next week, chapter 14, Steve will lead us through that. Thank you so much.